My food business is dry. Nobody buys from me.
Use this water. It's not ordinary water.
What is inside?
Water washed from the bodies that are not meant to wake again. But once you use it, people will come. They will rush your food. They won't be able to resist.
This is what I want. More customers to rush my food.
In Lagos, there was this tiny restaurant owned by a woman called Madam Sarah. Her place was barely noticed. Small, boring, and always empty. Her food, let's just say it wasn't winning anyone over. For years, she sat there waiting for customers, but nothing happened. People went to other restaurants instead. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed. Suddenly, people couldn't stop talking about her food. They started rushing to her little shop, forming long lines, arguing, and even pushing to get a plate before it finished. It was shocking. The other restaurants were practically empty because everyone wanted to eat at Madam Sarah's place. And here's the funny part. Her food didn't even improve. It was the same recipes, the same bland taste. But for some reason, people kept coming back. Soon, they stopped calling her Madam Sarah and started calling her Madam Sweet. The name spread like water, and she became the talk of the town. Strange things started happening. Customers reported having dreams about shadowy figures calling their names. Some even say they could hear whispers at night, like a voice asking, "Are you really satisfied?" People were hooked on her food, but it was like something deeper was going on. There was another restaurant right next to Madam Sweet's called Ada's Kitchen. Ada was the queen of tasty food in the area. People loved her cooking and always praised her for her delicious meals. Her restaurant was always full, and everyone knew she had the best jollof rice in Lagos. But then, out of nowhere, Madam Sweet's tiny shop started getting all the attention. People left Madam Ada's tasty meal and ran to Madam Sweet's bland food. Madam Ada couldn't believe it. Her once busy restaurant became empty, and it was like she didn't exist anymore. Madam Ada couldn't let it go. Almost every day, she found herself at Madam Sweet's restaurant, watching, listening, searching for something, anything to explain the sudden change. But every time, she came up empty-handed. Everything looked normal, too normal. One afternoon, as she stood outside pretending to admire the menu, a group of regular customers noticed her. "Ah, Madam Ada," one man said with a smirk, "You're here again, looking for cooking lessons." The crowd laughed, and another woman chimed in. "Jealousy won't change anything. Just accept that Madam Sweet is the queen now." Ada's face changed with anger, but she stayed calm. "Jealous? Of bland food? Please," she said. "There's something going on here, and all of you will see it one day." Just then, Madam Sweet stepped out with her ever-present smile. "Ah, my dear Ada," she said sweetly. "Back again. I didn't know you liked my restaurant so much." "I don't," Ada replied sharply. "I'm just trying to figure out why people have suddenly lost their sense of taste." Madam Sweet chuckled softly, her eyes glinting. "Maybe they're just tired of the same old recipes," she said, turning back to her kitchen. As Madam Sweet disappeared inside, Ada caught a strange smell in the air, faint but sharp, like something metallic mixed with spices. It sent a shiver down her spine, but when she looked around, no one else seemed to notice. Determined, she muttered under her breath, "I will find out your secret no matter what." Ada, a devoted Christian, had started praying daily for her restaurant, asking God to help her win back her customers. One morning, while finishing her prayers just before sunrise, she saw something strange. Through the window of her own restaurant, she noticed Madam Sweet stepping out of her shop, carrying an empty bucket. The streets were still quiet. Ada frowned. Where could she be going this early? She watched as Madam Sweet hurriedly headed down the road, taking a route that didn't lead to the market or anywhere familiar. Ada wanted to follow her, but Madam Sweet disappeared too quickly. The next morning, Ada was ready. She finished her prayers earlier and waited near the door of her restaurant, peeking out carefully. Just as she suspected, Madam Sweet came out again with the same bucket, walking the same strange route. Ada slipped outside and quietly followed her. Ada kept her distance, her heart beating faster with every step. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the streetlights cast eerie shadows on the quiet roads. Madam Sweet's quick steps echoed faintly as she passed empty corners and older buildings. But then, Madam Sweet turned into the cemetery. Ada froze, fear gripping her legs. What was she doing here? For a moment, she wanted to turn back, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She followed quietly, hiding behind an old fence. Madam Sweet approached a man. He held a rubber with brown smelling water and the smell filled the air. Ada covered her nose. Is it fresh? Madam Sweet asked, her voice clear and calm. Very fresh, the man replied, straight from the washed Unalive bodies. Madam Sweet nodded and handed him some money. The man carefully poured the brown smelly water into her bucket, and the sharp metallic odor made Ada's stomach turn. She crouched lower behind the fence, shaking. That smell, Madam Sweet said as she held the bucket. Perfect. My customers will keep coming back for more. Ada's hands shook as she clamped her mouth shut. Unalive bodies. Washed water. What was Madam Sweet doing with this strange liquid? And how was it tied to her food? Ada didn't have the answers, but she knew this was far from normal. Ada quietly followed Madam Sweet back to her restaurant, hiding in the shadows as she entered. She carefully peeped through a crack in the window, and what she saw left her shocked. Madam Sweet had poured the strange brown-smelling water from Unalive bodies into a pot and was now cooking food for her customers, acting as if everything was completely normal. Ada felt her stomach turn, and she couldn't stay there any longer. She ran out of her restaurant, her mind racing. What do I do now? She thought, feeling confused and anxious. Without thinking twice, Ada headed straight to her pastor, desperate to find guidance. Together, they prayed early that morning, seeking clarity about what was happening. As they prayed, Ada began to feel calmer, and suddenly, an understanding came to them. It was revealed that Madam Sweet's food was not ordinary. It was connected to the strange water she had seen, and it was affecting the lives of those who ate it in unexpected ways. The source of her influence was a set of beads she always wore on her wrist. If the beads were cut, it would break the unusual hold Madam Sweet had on the people. Ada held tightly to her pastor's hand, her heart pounding with both fear and determination. She knew there was more to uncover, and she wasn't going to give up. The next day, Ada decided to see Madam Sweet during the lunch rush. She had no plan, only the hope that she could find a way to remove the black beads from Madam Sweet's wrist. The restaurant was packed as always, with people shouting their orders and scrambling to get their plates. Ada pushed through the crowd until she reached the counter, where Madam Sweet stood, smiling as she served food. Ah, Ada, Madam Sweet greeted her, her voice as sweet as always. Come to taste my food today? Ada forced a smile. No, I'm just here to say hello, she replied, her eyes looking to the black beads on Madam Sweet's wrist. Her heart pounded as she tried to think of an excuse to cut them. As Madam Sweet leaned over to serve another plate, Ada quickly reached out, pretending to steady the tray. Her fingers grazed the beads, and she tried to tug them off. But Madam Sweet turned sharply, her smile fading. What are you doing? Madam Sweet asked, her voice low but sharp. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at Ada's hand. Oh, nothing, Ada stammered, quickly pulling her hand back. I thought the tray was going to fall. She backed away, her face flushed. Madam Sweet's smile returned, but Ada felt the weight of her glare long after she left the restaurant. The following morning, Ada decided to try again. This time, she waited until the restaurant was quieter. She stepped inside, her hands shaking but determined. Madam Sweet was at the back, stirring a pot. The black beads gleamed on her wrist, catching the light. Ada moved closer, pretending to admire the food. You're always working so hard, Ada said, her voice calm but her nerves shaking inside. Let me help you stir. Madam Sweet chuckled and handed over the spoon. As Ada took it, she inched closer, her fingers brushing the beads. This time, she pulled harder, hoping they would snap. But Madam Sweet reacted instantly. She holds Ada's hand, her grip like steel. What are you doing? She asked, her voice eerily calm. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a look that sent chills down Ada's spine. I thought it was falling off, Ada stammered, trying to stay calm. Madam Sweet let go of her hand, but her eyes stayed locked on Ada. Be careful, Ada, she said softly. You might end up in trouble if you're not. Ada swallowed hard and quickly stepped back, her heart racing. She left the restaurant, her mind spinning. She had failed again, but she wasn't giving up. Whatever Madam Sweet was hiding, she would find a way to stop it. Ada was angry after her failed attempt to cut the bead. That night, she prayed harder than ever, asking for strength and guidance. As she prayed, A calm voice echoed deep within her spirit. The kingdom of God, take it by force. Ada opened her eyes, filled with newfound courage. She decided there was no more room for hesitation. The next day, Ada stormed into Madam Sweet's restaurant during the busiest hour. The crowd was much, as usual, customers shouting to get their food. Ada pushed her way to the counter where Madam Sweet stood, her black beads glinting in the light. Madam Sweet, Ada called out firmly. Madam Sweet turned, smiling as always, but there was something colder in her expression now. Ah, Ada, she said, her tone sugary but sharp. What is it today? Are you here to cause more trouble? I'm here to end this, Ada replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding. She stepped closer, silently praying as her hand tightened around the scissors hidden in her pocket. Madam Sweet's smile faltered. And what? She asked, her tone lower, almost cold. You know what I mean, Ada said vaguely, not giving her plan away. Then, before Madam Sweet could react, Ada moved forward, her prayer louder. With one swift motion, she caught the beads off Madam Sweet's wrist. The beads scattered to the ground, and the entire restaurant fell silent. Everything stopped. Madam Sweet froze in place, and suddenly, her body twisted unnaturally. Her form shimmered and warped, transforming into something terrifying. Half human, half spirit. Her skin darkened, her eyes glowed faintly, and the air around her grew heavy. The customers screamed and ran out of the restaurant, chairs and plates falling as they fled. Ada stared in shock, unable to move. Moments later, Madam Sweet shifted back into her human form, but her composure was now gone. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. Suddenly, she burst out of the restaurant and fell to her knees in the middle of the street. I confess, Madam Sweet shouted, her voice shaking. I went to Baba. He gave me the power to make people love my food. The remaining customers gasped, whispering among themselves. Madam Sweet's voice grew louder. The brown water is from the wash from unalive bodies. I mix it into the food, and the customers keep coming. Baba said it would work. Ada watched, stunned as Madam Sweet clutched her hair, tears streaming down her face. Then, her confession turned into incoherent rambling. She began picking up random objects from the ground, muttering, I won't cut the bead. Baba promised the customers will love my food. The crowd stared, shocked, as Madam Sweet's madness took over. Ada stood silently, her heart heavy but her resolve clear. She turned to leave, knowing the truth had finally come out. When the beads were cut, everything changed. People's destinies returned, and they felt free, as if a weight had been lifted. Grateful customers came back to Ada, thanking her for her courage. Her restaurant flourished like never before, bustling with life and joy. Meanwhile, Madam Sweet roamed the market, her head disarray, shouting, Baba, Baba, I won't cut the bead. The customers will love my food. Her once-driven shop stood empty, a shadow of its former self. Ada smiled, knowing she had done the right thing. Peace had returned, and the people were finally free.